Hello again, we are talking about the development of brain. This is the last section in this presentation. So we're talking about brain development, and since this is the last conclusory section, so we'll talk about the forebrain. The forebrain is formed by one primary, two secondary vesicles. A primary vesicle being very important as gives rise to the lateral outpouchings of the secondary vesicle and the central part, which forms the adult human cerebral hemispheres and the adjacent part of the midbrain. So we'll see how the prosencephalon, the primary brain vesicle, forms secondary brain vesicles. Then we'll talk about the hypophysis cerebri and the pineal gland. And finally, we'll see the development of telencephalon and development of the corpus striatum. So getting into it, the figure shows an adult brain. This in orange is the forebrain, in green the midbrain, in pink the hindbrain. We're talking about the development of the forebrain. So the diencephalon forms the median portion of the prosencephalon. Prosencephalon is the forebrain vesicle, the primary forebrain vesicle. It divides into a caudal portion which is known as the diencephalon. So the primitive diencephalon consists of two thick lateral walls and a thin roof and a thin floor plate. So the lateral walls are thick, the roof and the floor plates are thin. Now the lateral wall, they present a sulcus which is known as the hypothalamic sulcus. So this hypothalamic sulcus, which appears to be rostral, is the continuation of the sulcus limitans. So sulcus limitans, which are separating the alar and the basal plates, it continues rostrally to form the hypothalamic sulcus. This hypothalamic sulcus now divides a lateral wall into a dorsal region and a ventral region. Now the dorsal region develops into thalamus, and the ventral region, it encroaches on the floor plate to forms the hypothalamus. So this hypothalamic sulcus was formed. This hypothalamic sulcus, it divides the lateral wall into two parts, the dorsal and the ventral regions. Now the dorsal region, it develops into the thalamus, and the ventral region forms the hypothalamus. So this was all about the development of thalamus and the hypothalamus. Now let's move to hypophyses cerebri. So hypophysis cerebri, or the pituitary gland, this is the location of the pituitary gland. It is a downgrowth from the floor of the anterior hypothalamus. So the ventral portion that lies below the hypothalamic sulcus, it forms the hypothalamus, and from the anterior hypothalamus there is a downgrowth which is known as the hypophysis cerebri. The neurohypophysis joins as an upgrowth from the stomodium, and the union of which forms the hypophysis cerebri. Now the adenohypophysis, the neurohypophysis and the adenohypophysis, they join to form the pituitary gland. We've taken up the pituitary gland in detail in others presentation, so it would not be taken up in detail here. Now the pineal gland. Now the epithalamus, which comprises of the pineal gland and the habenular nuclei, it develops posteriorly in the roof plate. So this in red is the region of the pineal gland. Here you can see the pineal gland in yellow. It is present in the epithalamic region of the diencephalon. Now the epithalamus, it consists of the pineal gland and the habenular nuclei. Two things make up the epithalamic region, the pineal gland and the habenular nuclei. These are present in the posterior aspect of the roof plate. Now, the pineal gland, it grows posteriorly from the roof plate at its junction with the midbrain. So when the roof plate comes into junction with the midbrain, it is from where the pineal gland grows. It lies on the dorsal surface of the midbrain between the two superior colliculi. So the pineal gland lies between the two superior colliculi and where? On the dorsal surface of the midbrain. Pineal gland has also been talked about in detail, so would not be taken up in this presentation. So let's talk about the telencephalon now. So the figure, this is diencephalon, this is telencephalon. These are the two parts of the prosencephalon. These are the secondary brain vesicles, these are the primary brain vesicles. So now the telencephalon consists of a median part and two lateral diverticular or the cerebral vesicles. So this is the median part and these are the two lateral diverticular. Now the median part forms a small anterior part of the third ventricle. Now this median part, it contributes to the anterior part of the third ventricle. Now the lamina terminalis, it limits the ventricle rostrally. It represents the cephalic end of the primitive neural tube and corresponds with the site of closure of the anterior neuropore. So the site of closure of the anterior neuropore is determined by lamina terminalis, and lamina terminalis limits the ventricle rostrally, that is caudally. Now, still talking about telencephalon. Now the lateral diverticular or the cerebral vesicles, they represent the rudiments of the cerebral hemispheres. So these cerebral hemispheres, here you can see the frontal, the temporal, the parietal and the occipital lobes. These are the lobes of the forebrain, that is the cerebrum, and these lateral diverticular of the telencephalon, they represent the rudiments of the cerebral hemispheres. So the cavities of the hemispheres, the lateral ventricles, they communicate with the cavity of the diencephalon, the third ventricle, through the interventricular foramen. Interventricular foramen is also known as interventricular foramen of Monroe. So developing cerebral hemisphere, they enlarge first forward, then upward, and then backward. So first they enlarge forward, then backward, and then upward. So this order is followed when during the development of telencephalon. So overall, they overlap the diencephalon and the mesencephalon and the cerebellar rudiments. So they expand so rapidly, this forebrain is expanding so rapidly that it overshadows the development of the midbrain and the development of the hindbrain. So now the lowest parts of the medial wall of the hemispheres, where they're attached to the roof of the diencephalon, they remain thin due to disproportionate growth of the parts of the hemispheres. So the upper part of the hemispheres, they grow very rapidly, while the lower parts do not grow as such, so they remain thin. Now, still talking about telencephalon, the choroid plexus. Now, the choroid plexus lies in the third ventricle. So the choroid plexus of the third ventricle, it produces laterally into the lateral ventricle along a line. This line is known as the choroid fissure. So the choroid plexus, it passes from the third ventricle into the lateral ventricle along the choroid fissure. Now, above the choroid fissure, the medial wall of the hemisphere thickens to form the hippocampus. So somewhere in this region, the middle wall of the medial wall of the hemisphere has thickened to form the hippocampus. Now, the subsequent massive expansion of the cerebral hemispheres, the neocortex, the hippocampus is displaced posterior inferiorly into the lateral ventricle. So then initially there is production of hippocampus in the medial wall of the above the choroid plexus. Then there is massive expansion of the cerebral cortex. The neocortex has been formed, and this formation of neocortex pushes the hippocampus and displaces it posterior inferiorly into the lateral ventricle. Now a fornix is drawn out an efferent tract on its medial aspect. So fornix is formed and it acts as an efferent tract and lies on the medial aspect of the hippocampus. Now the choroid fissure also becomes curved and interposed between the fornix and the diencephalon. So the choroid fissure, it becomes curved, somewhat curved in structure, and now it is interposed between the fornix and the diencephalon. So now talking about the development of the corpus striatum. So it develops bilaterally in the floor of telencephalon. So we're talking about this area, which is adjacent to the thalamus. So it lies adjacent to the thalamus, develops in the floor of the bilaterally in the floor of the telencephalon. These are the sensory motor control centers. So these are the sensory motor control centers. After development of the neocortex, the development of descending fibers from the cerebral cortex and ascending fibers from the thalamus to the cerebral cortex. So neocortex has been formed. Now descending fibers are formed from the cortex to the thalamus, and ascending fibers are formed from the thalamus to the cerebral cortex. So here you can see these are the fibers we are talking about. These are being formed, the ascending and the descending fibers. Now the fibers, they form the internal capsule and now divide the striatum into two parts. So we have the caudate nucleus, which lies to the dorsomedial aspect of the internal capsule, and in the ventrolateral portion of the internal capsule we have the lentiform nucleus. So these sensoromotor control centers have been formed. These include the caudate nucleus on the dorsomedial side and the lentiform nucleus on the ventrolateral portion. So now let's talk about the membranes and meninges that cover the brain. So there are three meninges that cover the brain from outside to inside. These are the from the dura mater, the arachnoid matter, and the pia mater. So let's see what are the various coverings and meninges of the brain. So these meninges are actually derived from the mesenchyme which surrounds the neural tube. So the mesenchyme which is surrounding the neural tube actually give rises to the meninges that cover the brain. But before brain there are other layers that are present. So first of all we have scalp. Scalp is the outermost layer that provides protection to the brain. Then we have thick skull. Skull is the bony layer that provides most of the protection to the brain. Then we have the periosteal dura mater. So the dura mater that is kind of merged with the periosteum of the bone. This is the periosteal dura mater. Then we have the meningeal dura mater, the dura mater that is actually the dura of the brain, which is a part of the meninges. Then we have the arachnoid mater. Arachnoid mater lies just below the dura mater. Below the arachnoid matter and lies the pia mater. Here in dark pink is the pia mater. Between the arachnoid and the pia mater is the subarachnoid space. Now the subarachnoid space is the area into which the cerebrospinal fluid flows. So this is the subarachnoid space, this area. And now below the subarachnoid space is the pia mater in dark pink, and finally below the pia mater lies the cerebral cortex, the tissue or the brain tissue itself. So the layers of the brain and the layers that cover the brain include the scalp, then we have the skull, then we have the periosteal dura mater, then we have the meningeal dura mater, then we have arachnoid mater, then we have subarachnoid space, then we have pia mater, and finally the cerebral cortex. So this was all about this section. In this section we saw the development of forebrain. We saw how the forebrain vesicle formed the adult forebrain. Mind you, the development of forebrain is very important because Very important structures are being formed in this area. I hope you understood and liked this lecture. For further such sections, keep watching sqadia.com.